Hello, good day, and welcome to my channel. Today, I will be talking about how American exceptionalism erases Indigenous culture. It's a critical examination. My name is Wellington. I have a bachelor's in history, a master's in intelligence studies, with a focus on misinformation, deception, and propaganda. That's a mouthful, I know. I also have a graduate certificate in counterintelligence. I spent 7.5 years in the infantry, where I deployed multiple times, and I have now spent almost 8 years working in the intelligence community. So believe me when I tell you that I am kind of qualified to talk about misinformation, disinformation, deception tactics, and all of that. But what does this have to do with Indigenous people, you might say? Well, we're going to get into that. But first, I would like to read you a quote. The idea of American exceptionalism is rooted in the belief that the United States is unique in its values of democracy, freedom, and opportunity. But this narrative comes at a cost, erasing the history, cultures, and voices of Indigenous peoples who lived on this land long before the concept of America existed. End quote. If that offends you, or if you want to get into the comments and talk about, victim mentality and all this other stuff, fine. That is your right. But I would just ask that you listen. And hopefully we can all learn from this, okay? So how propaganda, misinformation, and historical omissions perpetuate this erasure is what I will be talking about throughout this video. So what is American exceptionalism? Well, the definition of it is it's a belief that the U.S. is fundamentally different and superior to other nations. Now, let me give you a brief history. This was coined by Alexis de Tocqueville. Hopefully I got it right. I'm sorry. And it became central to American identity during the 20th century. Now, the problem is that this belief frames history in ways that glorify colonialism while downplaying atrocities like genocide and displacement of Indigenous people. Now, I get it. That might offend some people to hear the word genocide and America and everything like that, and especially in the timeline that we're living in currently. But again, these are facts. This has happened. It is what it is. And, we can't downplay it. Not if we want to make our country great. You cannot downplay it. So that moves us into section 2 of this, the historical context and erasure. The myth of discovery. Columbus discovered America, a narrative ignoring the millions of Indigenous people that were already here. Also ignoring the fact that Leif Erikson got here long before Columbus did, from Europe. So if we're going to say that a European discovered America, which we know they didn't, then maybe not say it's Christopher Columbus and say it's actually Leif Erikson, or we could possibly say that the first European to discover America was Leif Erikson, not Christopher Columbus. And before I piss off the Italians, sorry, you guys did not discover it. Neither did Leif Erikson, because there were people already here. But if we want to say that they discovered it, then maybe we reframe it as the first Europeans to discover America would actually be Leif Erikson, not Christopher Columbus. No matter what people want to say, and textbooks often frame Indigenous peoples as obstacles to progress rather than as sovereign nations. Now, I have gotten this from people in previous comments on the other video talking about American exceptionalism. And one comment was, name a country that has never been conquered. Okay. New Zealand, Thailand, I think Kenya. The list goes on. There's been quite a few countries that have never actually been colonized and or conquered. So, so if we want to look at, and as we should look at, indigenous tribes as sovereign nations, and people are going to bring up the, well, have they been conquered argument, or places that haven't been conquered? Then, there you go. There's a handful. There's a couple. A quick Google search can solve that for you. So, but let's move on. As I mentioned, the textbooks often frame indigenous people obstacles rather than sovereign nations. And Manifest Destiny and its impact discusses the role of justifying westward expansion, which led to forced removals like the Trail of Tears. Now, American history and in the current, again, climate that we live in will try to frame things in a way to kind of gloss over this. But I learned about the Trail of Tears in school, and I grew up mostly predominantly in the South. We actually, I would say, do a good job at talking about the Trail of Tears. We haven't tried to erase that from history, from our history, but still, we shouldn't gloss over it. And what has happened has happened. But we should discuss that role of Manifest Destiny a little more often. And the propaganda during this time romanticized settlers as pioneers while villainizing indigenous resistance. Look at, for instance, growing up, even when I was a child, we would play cowboys and, we would also hear great stories about, General Custer and Custer's last stand, But what does that mean we're doing then? We're glorifying what as opposed to what? We are saying that one was, a great last stand of American soldiers versus the resistance of indigenous people, when in reality, it's us taking their sovereign land. And at this point, we can actually say that it is us breaking treaties that we have made with these people to push them off of this land, to take this land. And we'll get into that, but let's move on to cultural genocide and how that plays into it. And I know people are not going to like what I have to say, but again, facts backed up by sources. Residential schools and forced assimilation policies aimed to kill the Indian and save the man. This is what we were doing. And the destruction of languages, traditions, and spiritual practices. For instance, banning of the sun dance and potlatch ceremonies. I hope I said that right. If I didn't, please get in the comments, let me know. But, we did these things. This country did these things, and this country does this a lot. You often hear, and at least I heard growing up, and I've heard even in my time in the military that, we should get rid of the notion that you are African American, you are Italian American, you're Irish American, Scottish American, German American, American Samoan, whatever, right? We have heard in people who embrace their heritage, even white people who embrace their heritage of being German American or English American or Scottish American, Irish American, Italian American, whatever, have been told in the past that we should all drop the blank American and we should just be American. And I can get down with that. I honestly can get down with that. I can get down with dropping African American and just being called American if you want to actually recognize my culture and recognize my heritage, and you're going to treat me as an equal. Now, I say that because I have had this conversation with people. I've had this conversation many a times. I truly believe that America is a melting pot and that each culture that comes here brings something that adds to our foundation as Americans and adds to our nation's great history and also changes us for the better. The word DEI is in the news a lot for the past couple of years now. And that word, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think is something that we could actually capitalize on rather than demonize. Even if you're all of the same race, but you come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, or you come from different regions of a country, you have a different experience than someone else, right? So why then are we afraid to have that be included? Do you see where I'm going with this? What I'm getting at is, let's say we are all the same race. We're all here in America. We all look the same. But you're from Texas and I'm from Florida, and the other person is from New York and the other person is from, I don't know, Washington State or Idaho or something, right? So we're all from different parts of the country. What does that, if we all get together, do we all have the same experiences? No. Do we all see something the same way? No, we don't. We see things in a different light. And when attacking an issue, let's say we all work together, we're on a group project and we're attacking this issue that we need to figure out and we need to settle. The person from Texas might actually have the best idea on how to do something, but the person from New York might actually know the way to execute that. Meanwhile, me from Florida, I'm just lost in the sauce and I'm just trying to figure out, oh my goodness, what are we doing? Right? But do y'all get where I'm coming from on this, right? So we're all attacking this thing from the same, not the same viewpoint or lens. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a perfect example on why DEI should be a thing, because we all see things differently. We all come at things differently. But when we're all included, we can actually accomplish that task successfully. Now, I know I kind of went off on a little tangent there on that, but when we're talking about the destruction of languages, traditions, cultures, and spiritual practices, it doesn't just stop with the indigenous people that were here. That stops with telling people that you shouldn't be Irish American. I have Irish ancestry in my blood. So you're going to sit here and tell me that I shouldn't be proud of that? I have Germanic ancestry in my blood. Should I not be proud of that? I legitimately do. I am proud of that. And if people want to get at me for being proud of my mixed heritage, well, that's a topic for another day. But if we're truly going to say that we are all American, then everybody here needs to be treated as such, or else it's a sham. You're just trying to erase somebody's culture and their traditions and their language. Do you see where I'm coming from at this? So if you're going to get into comments and you're going to tell me that, I'm wrong or that I'm playing a victim mentality, I'm not. What I'm saying is that we should and we can do better, because just because somebody is Irish American doesn't mean that they don't bring something to the table. Just because somebody is African American doesn't mean that they don't bring something to the table, or Korean American, or Japanese American, or Chinese American, or, name any other ethnic group, country, doesn't matter. We should not be erasing people's languages and their cultures and their traditions and their spiritual practices. We should be embracing that, because when we embrace it, we'll see, oh my goodness, okay, that's another way that we can do something. And as Americans, I believe that that is another way that we can say, okay, we're going to take what your culture does and how they do something. We're going to tweak it for us, and we're going to do it better. And by doing it better, we now are able to say, oh my goodness, look, we've added this from this culture, and it now fits this piece of the puzzle that makes our country great. This is my version of American exceptionalism, and why I think that we should lean into it, but in a way that is holistic, I guess, that doesn't erase other people. We acknowledge the broken past that we have, but we improve on it. You know, I was a Boy Scout for a long time, and I was taught that when you leave an area, you leave it better than how you left it. So that to me is saying that we acknowledge that our past, right, our erasure of indigenous culture, we can rectify that situation in some ways. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Nothing ever is. But we can improve on that. We can better it. We can look at this and attack it. But with that, let's move on to how the role of misinformation and propaganda in the media representation of it. Early Hollywood films depicting indigenous people as savages or noble but doomed, reinforcing stereotypes, right? Modern media often excludes indigenous perspectives altogether. Textbooks and education, how the U.S. history has sanitized to highlight American greatness while minimizing indigenous suffering. And I'll give you some examples. The good old Thanksgiving as a harmonious event rather than a moment of tension and survival. We like to paint Thanksgiving as this, great time that, the settlers came and broke bread and shared food and with the indigenous people, and the indigenous people did the same, as if the indigenous people were not doing this out of a necessity for survival. And same with the settlers. It was a mutual understanding. Hey, we're here. We're not going anywhere. Okay, they're here. They're not going anywhere. Okay, maybe we can work together. Survival. And in the political rhetoric of it, politicians framing the U.S. as a land of endless opportunities while ignoring ongoing struggles, especially in indigenous communities, such as land disputes. I talked about this. Missing and murdered indigenous women. This is still a touchy subject that still goes on today. And environmental exploitation. Do we need to talk about pipelines that are now being placed on indigenous land, even though they are considered to be sovereign nations within our country, and that they don't want them there? But yet we don't see it, and we push on with that, still pushing on with that expansion. Now, I know, again, there's going to be people in the comments, boo-hoo, cry harder. These are facts. Y'all, these are facts. And I already kind of went on my little tangent on what we should be doing, how we can help or better ourselves as a country as a whole. And now we're going to get into the consequences of erasure, right? The cultural loss. Generations of indigenous people lose connections to their heritage due to the systemic oppression. Is that right? Ask yourself, if you are a person, I'm not going to say Caucasian because, okay, real quick, Caucasian, white people are not Caucasian. Caucasian is a specific region. That's the country of Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, northern part of Turkey, southern part of Russia. Am I missing a country in there? Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. Anyways, that's the Caucasus region. So unless you come from there, you're not Caucasian. Just throwing that out there. But just imagine if somebody told you, if you were a proud Scottish American conservative man, and then I come and tell you that you are not allowed to practice your Scottish ways here in America. How would that make you feel? All right. Or, hey, you weren't actually born in Germany, nor do you speak German, so stop going to your little Oktoberfest celebrations. How would that make you feel? You wouldn't like it. You would probably tell me to shut up and go back to doing what I'm doing. But I say that because that is what happens here. That is the cultural loss to the heritage and the systemic oppression that these people have faced for centuries now. And then we get into economic inequality. And, we can talk about how many reservations face poverty rates due to historic land theft and broken treaties. Now, earlier I talked about the treaties, right? How we broke treaties. I don't like it when we go back on our word, right? I was raised that a man is only as good as his word. I feel like that's something that could resonate with a lot of people who are going to be saying cry harder and F your feelings and all that. But a man is only worth his word. One of the reasons why I am a staunch supporter of supporting Ukraine is because we made a treaty with them when they denuclearized, because they had the majority of the Soviet Union's nuclear armament. And in the 90s, when the Soviet Union fell, the three countries, now Russia, which was the head of the Soviet Union, the United States, and what then became Ukraine, again, right, because they were their own country, but umbrella of Soviet Russia fell, they became Ukraine again. But they had the majority or a good bulk of Russia's nuclear arms. And when we all came to the table, all three countries agreed that we would defend Ukraine if they were invaded ever by Russia. And Russia also agreed that they would never invade Ukraine if they give up their nuclear arms. Russia invaded Ukraine. So they broke the treaty, and it was on us, the United States, because people are like, well, why are we supporting Ukraine? Why are we giving all this money to Ukraine? Because we have a treaty with them saying that we would help them in whatever kind of way we could. Now, what good is America? How great is America if we leave allies in the lurch? Come on now. What good are we? How, if a man is only worth his word, what good is our country if we go back on our word? Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe that we should be doing more for our people, for the American people. But at the same time, that money, and little side note, budget expenditure, every year we have our fiscal budget, and budget expenditure is divvied up and given out to other, all the agencies. The DOD has the highest budget. You want us to still be a world superpower? That is what comes with it. You might not like that, but at the same time, everybody's sitting there saying, why can't we give more money to the wildfire, to California to deal with the wildfires, or to North Carolina to deal with the hurricane damage and all this other stuff? That's because that budget comes from FEMA. And the other budget of the money, that the billions of dollars that are going to Ukraine and Israel, is coming from the DOD. That's coming out of the DOD's budget. And then people are saying, well, why can't we just take that money? Well, or why can't Biden just take that money from them and give it here? Because Biden can't, right? This video, Trump is now in office. This is, now people will be saying, why can't Trump just take that money and give it to whatever? And you can't. Legally speaking, he can't. He has to go to the Senate because the Senate controls the purse, right? The Senate is the one who controls the money. So now President Trump, then at the time, President Biden would have had to gone to the Senate and then ask the Senate for money to be able to take from the DOD and then give to whatever other agency right now at the time needs it. And the chances of that happening is like slim to none. Okay, so don't get angry at whoever is in power right now, Trump. Don't get angry at Trump if a natural disaster happens, but he's giving money to Israel or Ukraine or name an ally, right? Because that money was already allocated to that agency to use at their disposal. He is the one in charge. So yes, he gets the blame, he gets the fault, but it's not really his fault. So please, we were talking about how reservations face high poverty rates due to broken treaties, and I went on that tangent. But now we're going to get to the environmental destruction, right? Sacred lands exploited, and as I mentioned earlier, for pipelines, mining, without indigenous consent. And this is what we can do to help. So we're moving on to what we can do to help. We can educate ourselves. We can read books. We can watch documentaries by indigenous authors and filmmakers. And I'm going to give you some examples here. Okay, here's an example. Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. It's a book by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. And it's supporting indigenous sovereignty. That's a book. We can support indigenous sovereignty. We can advocate for honoring treaties and land rights. Like I mentioned, I'm a big proponent of why we're helping Ukraine, because we have treaties with them. And we can't say that we're good allies if we're going back on treaties. Now, are there ways that we can go about supporting and doing things if you don't like the war? There are other ways that we can support. Doesn't always have to be money, doesn't always have to be arms. There are other ways. But at the same time, we do have these treaties in place. And some of them are more detailed than others. So maybe the treaties need to be revisited. I guess that's a method, right? We can support organizations like the Native American Rights Fund and the Indian Law Resource Center. So that's another thing that we can do to help. We can amplify indigenous voices. We can follow indigenous activists and creators on social media. We can share their work to counteract misinformation. See, I'm getting into the deception, the propaganda, the misinformation, my expertise in the history, right? History degree. So we can engage in land acknowledgement. I don't like the fact that we keep encroaching on their lands. We've made treaties with them. We should honor those treaties. We can recognize the indigenous land that we occupy, and we can support local tribes. We can advocate for some policy changes. I'm not saying that, again, what has happened has happened. But by doing some of these things, we can try to rectify the situation to an extent. We can push for inclusion of accurate indigenous history in school curricula. Like I said, I learned about the Trail of Tears. However, I didn't learn about some of the other things until I actually joined the military, and my senior drill sergeant, who was black, not even an indigenous person, sat us down and actually taught us about some of the cavalry units that we would probably wind up in. Oh, by the way, I did wind up in one, Spurs. And some of the stuff that they did, like the one I wound up in, I was not taught that until basic training. So, push for that accurate history in the school curricula. None of that is going to radicalize your child into thinking that this is a bad country. Quote, American exceptionalism is a powerful myth, but one that has caused harm by erasing the stories of those who were here long before. And by seeking the truth and amplifying indigenous voices and demanding change, we can begin to dismantle this harmful narrative and support the resilience of indigenous cultures. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this. Like, subscribe, share, get in the comments.